This is PTV World. You're watching Fault Lines and I'm Syed Shabahat Ali. International media is abuzz with the rising tide of religious and political intolerance in India. The economy is emasculated. Chinese troops are engaged with Indian military in the Western Himalayas. And people in the state of Kashmir are widely disenchanted with Delhi. The political leadership in India is inciting hatred and violence. India is now governed by intrusive and intolerant forces determined to quash the minorities and call political opponents with the use of brute force. There is a great damage being done to the fabricated face of India, which was painted with fake colors of secularism and global perception of mounting intolerance is now on the rise. India, ironically, is trying to simultaneously sell itself as a land of pluralism and tolerance, while promoting communal hatred for minorities. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package and we'll be back.
The coming of Bharatiya Janata Party in power since 2014 has made India more intolerant than it ever was before. The adoption of ultra-nationalist Hindutva ideology has caused a rise in attacks against the religious minorities, and the government has failed to investigate them. Pew Research Center entered India among the worst countries in the world for religious intolerance. The cases examined by Pew include hate crimes, mob violence, communal violence, religion-related terror, use of force to prevent religious practices, and forced conversion, among many others. In April 2020, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom listed India as a country of particular concern for the first time since 2004. Michelle Bachelet, the United Nations Human Rights Chief, condemned the religious intolerance in India in her annual report to the United Nations Human Rights Council in March 2019. Muslims are a frequent target of hate and xenophobia. Intolerance in India has been exhibited by her actions through the Citizens Amendment Act and the National Registry of Citizens, ongoing farmers' protests, and the actions in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In the valley of 9 million Kashmiris, India has increased her military presence to about 700,000, making it the largest prison in the world. Since August 5, 2019, 308 civilians have been killed, 14,500 arrested, and 97 Kashmiri women have been molested. The CAA combined with NRC created a situation where being a Muslim and documentless could deprive one of citizenship rights completely. Subsequent protests in New Delhi led to some of the city's worst bloodshed in decades, when Hindu gangs, encouraged and abetted in part by the Home Ministry and the ruling BJP party, targeted Muslims and cracked down on anti-CAA protesters of all faiths. Furthermore, Indian government's reaction to the farmers' protest has been controversial. Critics say that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's approach to dissent increasingly involves stifling dissenting voices, blocking the internet, and cracking down on journalists. The blockade of freedom of speech by India has drawn growing international condemnation from human rights groups and famous personalities alike, such as Rihanna, Greta Thunberg, and Meena Harris. India responded with arrests against any voice of dissent, such as the recent arrest of Disha Ravi, a 22-year-old student protester and climate change activist. Dr. Ashok Swain, an Indian-born professor of peace and conflict research at Uppsala University in Sweden, has stated that the Hindu nationalism or state-sponsored anti-Muslim sentiment is a dangerous game that will divide the country, adding that Modi has made it India versus Pakistan or Hindu versus Muslims and the rest of India versus Kashmiris.
Muslims, who make about 14% of Indian population and is the largest minority in the country, have again been marginalized with the introduction of new citizenship laws. These laws have been discussed and debated in the international media with a lot of resentment coming from many corners. Watch this report before I introduce my first guest in the program.
Protests have hit the streets of India. This comes just a day after the country's parliament passed a law making it easier for non-Muslim minorities from neighboring countries to seek Indian citizenship.
Bill is passed.
In the northeastern state of Assam, which shares a border with Bangladesh, protesters say the measure will open the region to a flood of foreigners. Others say the new law is blatantly anti-Muslim. The Citizenship Amendment Bill grants Indian nationality to Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, Jains, Parsis, and Sikhs who fled Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan before 2015. Prime Minister Modi's Hindu nationalist government denies it discriminates against any group. In a tweet, Modi promised it would alleviate the suffering of many who faced persecution for years. Meanwhile, troops have been deployed in Assam and the internet has been suspended, according to government officials, to prevent inflaming passions and exasperating the law and order situation. The bill was passed in Parliament on Wednesday and becomes official law once signed by the president, which is simply a formality.
My first guest in today's program is Dr. Kaul, who is a professor from Akron University and also director of Security Studies Department. And my second guest is based in Washington, D.C., a famous journalist, Saqib Islam, who has won many awards. Dr. Kaul, welcome to the show. Tell me, how do you view this new citizenship law introduced in India against the Muslims that marginalizes Muslims to a great extent?
It does seem to be quite discriminatory, and I would think that there's a political calculus behind this. This is part of Modi's attempt to energize his base, to basically build a following in the country among those who may be skeptical of where India's economy is going. So, you know, when you're not doing well on delivering the kind of things that are important to people, such as, you know, a growing economy or better education or things like that, it's quite common for politicians to turn to kind of cultural issues or hot button issues that inflame emotions, inflame passions. And that's what seems to be behind this from my perspective. This is nothing more than an attempt to gain political mileage with Indian voters.
Dr. Kaul, do you think playing such gimmicks on the political landscape actually helps him to garner further support from the Hindu majority?
Yes, I mean, if you look at how India's been doing recently with economic conditions, new laws put in place to change the way that agriculture is structured, this seems to be a pretty good method on his part to distract people from those kinds of things and play on emotions about the Muslim minority in the country.
Saqib, my first question, do you think that the polarization along the religious line is paying any dividends to the Indian polity?
Thank you, Shabhat, for having me in your show. It's a pleasure. The question that you have asked is, of course, a global question. When you talk about hate speech or polarization, religious intolerance, these are the things which have increased globally in last decade or better half of last decade, I would say. And this is a global phenomenon which has flourished. And the reason, of course, I believe is nationalism we have seen increase of nationalism around the world, be it Brazil, be it Japan, be it Turkey, be it India or Pakistan. And now, of course, we talk about United States of America. We have seen it flourished everywhere. And when we talk about nationalism, India's case is curious or different because it's called one of the largest democracies in the world. With 1.3 billion people, 1/5 of the world is there. And now Indian society has historically been stratified along caste, religion, and ethnic fault lines. And since last 6 years, when Modi government took over, the problems have been increasing. The reason, the steps that government is taking and the institutions, the way they're responding to all this has increased the problem. When you talk about Kashmir issue, the special, position of Kashmir, when we talk about this Citizenship Act, when we talk about Agriculture Act or agriculture reforms, the farmers issue, it all has realized, it all has made the other communities, other than 80% of Hindus living in that country, they feel they are marginalized. With every, of course, the Citizenship Act made Muslims realize that they are marginalized. The Farmers Act made the Sikhs in the majority realize that they are being marginalized. And the problem, again, nationalism, Modi government, Prime Minister Modi comes from RSS background, the BJP is a right-wing party, and they were always going to have a nationalist agenda. But nobody had thought that this is going to go this far. We have seen it in United States of America in recent years, but of course, it didn't end well here. So how it's going to end in India, that we have to see in future, as now Modi government is eyeing the 2024 election. So next 10 years, maybe, or next 9 years, we will see how it's gonna go in India. And the problem, again, I would say, is Prime Minister Modi or BJP party is going for the vote of majority. They have to make Hindus, who make the 80% of the population, happy. And that's
Saqib,
what they're
there
doing.
are internal problems. The Indian economy is in shambles. We see conflicts all over India, and India is also trying to engage with the external forces. Countries like China and Pakistan are also having problems with the Indian neighborhood. Tell me why all of this has so badly messed up with the BJP's government.
Well, Shabahat, Indian economic crises or issues are rooted in the politics, and if I may say, the divisive politics. Fiscal and monetary policies aside, when there is religious tensions, when there is divisive politics, when there is distrust in minorities or communities, of course, it is going to affect on the trust in the country, the trust in the government, and of course, is going to, show you impacts on the economy. India is world's sixth GDP, right at par with United Kingdom. They just like, there's a seesaw between the two countries. We have seen in United Kingdom, Brexit, of course, a national issue, a nationalist issue in United Kingdom, and that also costing them some economic crises. And again, here in India, when you look at the priorities, again, I will talk about like what are the priorities of this government, what Modi government is thinking ahead. They are at $2.3 trillion GDP. They're aiming for a $5 trillion economy in 2025. Of course, that's when the third Modi term will be. We'll see if it happens. But what are they doing? The note ban, that was an issue which really impacted the economy. They're neglecting the small businesses and benefiting the big industrialists like Ambani and other ones. So this whole Farmers Act or Farmers crisis also is because the big industries are gonna get help. But what about the small businesses? You see, India is also grappling with the pandemic, the COVID-19. So is the rest of the world. The United States has seen a bad economic impact in last year or so. And now what the government is doing, they are putting a lot of money in the small business. We have to see how India is going to react to pandemic, and then of course how they're trying to get...
Dr. Kaul, I'm coming back to you. There is a study that we have just seen, and it's from Dr. Lawrence Brett, who has identified early warning signs for fascism. He has examined perhaps 7 different case studies, and he says powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for human rights, identifying of enemies, scapegoats as unifying causes, and many more. I'm sure you might have seen that. Do you find these early symptoms of fascism in the Indian polity at the moment?
Well, one of the things I would say that list is also fairly descriptive of right-wing populism. I don't think you have to say that that goes necessarily completely to fascism, those kinds of attributes. So if I look at India, India to me seems to be falling very clearly into the category of a country that is governed by a right-wing populist government. I think
Dr. Kaul.
now we do see signs of authoritarianism of the government, but I don't necessarily see it becoming fascist. I think we haven't gotten there yet. Fascism is in many ways kind of the most extreme form of government that you can get on the right. Clearly authoritarian, clearly being very controlling when it comes to the media or critics, being very discriminatory against minorities. That's all true. But that's also, like I said, indicative of right-wing populism.
So
And so
being
that's
engulfed
where I'd
with
say
internal
India
crisis, do
is
you
not.
think this is why India is having increasing problem with external forces with countries like Pakistan and China?
I think India's nationalism is causing it problems on multiple
And how do you define that?
because it's taken a very belligerent stance towards Pakistan, towards China, because its nationalism is also very exclusionary within India, how it defines Indians, who are the real Indians. All of these things have caused the Modi government to have trouble with the outside world. And one of the things that we see is when the outside world pushes back, the government gets more defensive, cracks down harder on dissent. Anybody who looks like they're potentially criticizing the government or embarrassing the government um, bears the cost of that. Can potentially be, for example, charged with sedition. So there's kind of a vicious circle going on here where the nationalism of the BJP government is getting pushback from overseas, and then that's making the government more defensive and more restrictive of its own population.
Dr. Kaul, does that hamper India's reputation as a secular state abroad?
Oh, absolutely. I think India's reputation as a secular state is definitely eroding, and I think the BJP government really doesn't care very much about that's eroding. But what they do want to be known for is being a powerful country, being a country that's proud, and they're having a hard time because some powers from overseas are saying, look, you're eroding the rights of the people. You're particularly eroding the secularism that was so important in keeping a multi-faith, multi-ethnic country together. And so India, which is often touted as the world's largest democracy, is suffering from an image problem right now. But like I said, not to be too repetitive about this, it creates a vicious cycle of resentment on the part of Indian leaders when they hear those kinds of criticisms.
Okay, let me take a quick take from Saqib. Saqib, you just heard what Dr. Kaul said. What do you think these early signs of India increasingly becoming a difficult state to live for the minorities, how does it affect its reputation as a secular state?
Well, the answer to this question is right in front of us. Prime Minister Modi won his second term in 2019. He won in 2014 with simple majority, a mandate that none other party could have gotten in the last 30 years in that country. And what happened in 2002 in Gujarat when he was chief minister, that incident could have ended anybody's political career. But he went on to become the prime minister of that country. And now he's already eyeing his third term, 2024. And BJP, under BJP, of course, his party, a right-wing party. So it's all about political gain. It's all about winning elections. As I said, it's a global phenomenon. Donald Trump won on this. Prime Minister Imran Khan, I would say, won on this. Donald Trump said, America first. Turkey's Erdogan, he won on this same lines. So, I mean, division, political division, religious intolerance wins elections, and that's what is happening here. Prime Minister Modi, critics say the Prime Minister Modi and the Modi government have tolerated the violence against Muslims or other minorities in the country. But overall, it looks as nothing happened, and they are still on its way to win another election. So, whatever wins
Saqib, many in Islamabad will believe or will argue that this would not have happened without having enough support from United States. Many such states are not allowed by the international organizations to operate against their minorities to such a vicious extent. How would you comment on it?
Well, Shabahat, I don't think so. That, of course, the US is supporting India on such matters, but definitely India and United States are big allies, and they both need each other. India is, of course, world's second biggest nation, and US is strongest economy or second biggest economy in the world, and they're both historically been allies. What happened in the last few years between the friendship between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, it really was something else. They both had autocratic tendencies, they both had nationalistic agendas, and they both went after the majority vote on a nationalist agenda. But now the tone is different with the new elections in the United States. President Joe Biden and the Vice President Kamala Harris, although she has Indian roots, but they both have showed concerns about what's happening in India. They have both shown concerns regarding the human rights violations, the communal and religious and ethnic violence in India. So we'll see how it goes. Let me give you one example. When this Farmers Act came out, and then Trump government said that, of course, they appreciate all the steps that are being taken to make efficient Indian market, but these disputes should be resolved with dialogue. That's not, of course, something US would say on such a huge protest if it was some other government, or some other administration, I would say. But lastly, I would say, of course, US and India, the world's biggest democracy, India, could learn from world's strongest and greatest democracy in recent past. What happened on January 6th at the United States Capitol, the symbol of US democracy. Of course, India should learn, or Prime Minister Modi should see that words have power. The powerful people of the world have responsibility with their words. Whatever they say or whatever they don't say carries a lot of weight.
Thank you very much, Saqib, for being with me. And Dr. Kaul, how would you comment on what Saqib just said? How far would you agree with him?
I agree with everything he said. I think it's really important to point out that we see a trend around the world where particularly right-wing populist governments, they seem to be learning from each other. They seem to be borrowing from each other's playbooks in terms of how to win elections and how to stay in power. And one of the things that I think they've learned more than anything else is that divisions in society, be it religion or race or ethnicity, those can be used to mobilize a base of support. And we saw it in the United States, we've seen it in India, we've seen it in several other countries. And the thing is that this is a very short-term way of thinking. It wins elections in the short term. In the long term, it can create very significant divisions that can end up backfiring for the governments that implement these kinds of policies or use this kind of rhetoric. And I think the 6th January attack on the US Capitol is a good indication of what happens when you fire up passions too much. But in India, we've seen violence on the streets. And, if this continues, we may see more violence. We may see, major communal flare-ups as a consequence of using this kind of divisive mobilizing tactic. I think it's a short-sighted strategy for short-term gain, but it's got very important long-term costs.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaul, for coming to my show. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short break. Stay with us. We'll join back with the second segment of my program. Welcome back. With me over the phone is Professor Xin Fang. He's from Tsinghua University of Beijing. Professor, welcome to my program. My first question, there is an increasing pattern of hate crimes in India. How do you see that?
Thank you, Sabahat. Thank you for having me on this program again. Now there is a growing evidence that India becoming violent and hate-towards. If we take off the glamorous mantle of the so-called world's largest democracy, the dawn of each day, the normal Indian people is facing no hope, but gradually accustomed hatred.
Professor, we have seen this video of Ajit Doval, who has very blatantly agreed that it is the Indian terrorism that is infiltrating in Pakistan. And inside India, we see the mob lynching being done on the command of BJP leaders. But this is not collectively bringing in attention from the international actors. Before I take your response, I want you to watch this video for a while, please.
How do we tackle Pakistan? I talked about their having the nuclear threshold, having the strategic weapon systems, missiles, strategic partnership with China. India is having a long border with China and Pakistan. How do we tackle with it? We engage an enemy in three modes. One is a defensive mode. That is, you see all the chowkidars and chaprasis outside. That is, if somebody comes here, we'll prevent him. We will defend this. One is the defensive offense. That is to defend ourselves. We will go to the place from where the offense is coming. And third is the offensive mode, where you go outright. Nuclear threshold is a difficulty in the offensive mode, but not in the defensive offense. While we are working today only in the defensive mode. Now, when we come into the defensive offense, then we start working on the vulnerabilities of Pakistan. It can be economic, it can be internal security, it can be political, it can be their isolation internationally, it can be their this thing like that, of exposing their terrorist activities, or it can be anything. It can be defeating their policies in Afghanistan, making it difficult for them to manage internal political balance or internal security. I'm not going into those details. But when you change the engagement from the defensive mode, because in the defensive mode you throw 100 stones on me, I stop 90, still 10 hurt me, and I can never win. Because either I lose or there's a stalemate. You start war at your time, you throw a stone when you want, you have a peace when you want, you have the talks when you want. If you are in the defensive offense, we will see where the balance of equilibrium is. Pakistan's vulnerability is many, many times higher than of India. Once they know that India has shifted its gear from the defensive mode to defensive offense, they will find that it is unaffordable for them. You can do one Mumbai, you may lose Balochistan.
Professor Fang, you just watched him and this was a very serious conversation. How do you take this and how would you comment on it?
I personally believe that Mr. Doval admits, it's not only the real things, but also the tips of the iceberg of many, many things behind the scenes. Many controlled India. 750 disinformation media outlets in 116 countries and regions around the world, think tank, and the fake NGO. Through the India mainstream news agency, ANI, the Asian International News Agency, attacking Pakistan and China. Most importantly, after repeated media help, this false information in terms can produce more false information, distorting India and global internet users against China and Pakistan. Give the audience the false and the understanding. So I strongly suggest we can find the report and answer your questions. That we answer questions very more clearly and know the situations of India's information by that war against China and Pakistan. We should do something here.
Thank you very much, Professor Fang. You're always very enlightening, and I'm grateful for your participation in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, I have my first guest in the studio, Mr. Yasir Janjua, who is a defense analyst, and he's going to talk about the Indian polity and its fragmentation, as we have been discussing so far. Mr. Yasir, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
I was going through your social media handle and I found some of your comments about the developments in the Indian political system, where you were discussing that the mainstream leadership of BJP has gone behind the scene, and now there is this hate mantra-driven leadership that is coming on the canvas. Can you quickly comment on that, please?
Right. Well, I'd like to comment on that, but if you allow me, I'd like to comment something, because he's the guy now who's running the show. This guy called, the joker called Ajit Doval, I'm sorry to say. If I had a choice, I would not hire him as a chaiwala in my office, you know. And he is running their national security policy. What a joker he is. He's talking about defensive offensive. Can you tell me, now, a few weeks ago we now exactly know who orchestrated the Pulwama attack. They were blaming upon Pakistan, and it dawns out it was themselves who were doing it. And eventually they came to Balakot, and what happened after Balakot, that misery they can live with for the rest of their lives. So what defensive offensive is talking about? They have fault lines within India they cannot fix. For last 3 months, the farmers are sitting on the roads, and they can't do anything about it.
But is it not the right way when you cannot control the internal politics, when you cannot control the fragmentation within your own society?
This is what they've been doing all along. This is when they lost the 65 war, they thought we can't win a war from Pakistan on the battlefield. So they went with Mukti Bahani, they went into Bangladesh. Right now, the leadership, so-called leadership we call about, Narendra Modi, he was a registered agent or an operative of RSS who was involved in the 1971 fiasco. Is this the leadership? So their actual leadership, or those saner elements I've been talking about, the saner elements in the Indian society have taken a back seat now, because the hardliners have come in front. People like Ajit Doval are now dictating what needs to be done. And that is why you find more and more hate crimes in India, and more so the hate crimes against the marginalized communities. Predominantly the Muslims, and then after that, the Dalits or the Christians. Now the Sikhs have also become part of this, although this movement per se is a farmers' movement, which was not by the Sikhs, but now they are pushing the Sikhs, and this is probably going to give the rebirth to the Khalid.
We're going to come back to it later, but tell me about, as Professor Fang said, this disinfo lab. They were having a network of outlets that were propagating against Pakistan. How do you comment on it?
See, India, as I said, they've never been able to win a war in the conventional settings. So this is what they try to do. They've got a huge population, they've got a young population, they've got Twitter brigades. I sometimes give up because when I go on Twitter, they start abusing. So this Disinfo Lab was a very, very orchestrated, well-organized network of Indians spread across the world, registered companies, legitimate businesses who were providing disinformation to the world from Belgium and elsewhere in Europe so that it could give them legitimacy. But when their connections were found out, they were all going back to India. The thing is, they are trying to fight the fifth generation war because they can't win from China and Pakistan in the conventional fields. So they think we can use this mass media or the population that we have to win the war.
But Yasir, what do they actually get out of it? I just sometimes cannot comprehend it.
Okay, this is a very, very tricky part. Unfortunately for us, and I'll have to be very realistic, India being a 1.3 billion population, what they get out of it is they can conveniently get away with what all they're doing in Kashmir, what all they're doing in Punjab and Haryana right now. The world looks the other way because that's a huge economy, the second largest population in the world, and the world just shuts their eye because they don't want to annoy the Indian. And that's why the Indians use this Disinfo Lab kind of activities to create perceptions favorable towards India. The reality is different. The reality on ground is different. Only a few days ago, 5 prisoners have died in Indian jails. One of them has been accepted as a Pakistani. 4, we still are looking for the identity. They kill Pakistani prisoners in their jails. For what? If you've caught them, but this is as low as they can go. And when you've heard this guy, this joker, I only call him a joker, National Security Advisor, when they officially claim that yes, we do send them the terrorists inside Pakistan, then that is, now the difference is now Europeans are a little bit more waking up to this reality that they can't put up to this anymore. Americans are still not ready to, but still they have their compulsions. Countries in the Middle East have their compulsions because India has a big economy and it's a huge trading partner. Otherwise, what they are doing is in public domain.
Yasir, there's a book written by Etizaz Ehsan. It's captioned Divided by Democracy.
Yeah.
And he has very nicely articulated that the very survival of the Indian political infrastructure or the political framework is on the fact that they have a democracy that is giving due weightage to each faction of the society. But now this mad Hindutva taking over, and 20% of the minorities have now been pushed to the wall. Where will this eventually lead Indian polity to?
Okay, it's an interesting question, but I'll tell you what. BJP was formed in 1980, and the first election they fought after this creation of this party or amalgamation of few parties into BJP. Before it was Janta Party and then there was some other name, but in 1980 this became officially BJP. So in 1984, the first elections they contested, they could only win 2 seats. They could not win seats based on the democratic values. Then they realized, look, we have to galvanize the Hinduism, the Hindutva that you're talking about. So Ram Mandir movement was what they used eventually to gain the sympathies of predominant Hindu majority, because Muslims are only 14%. So they started the Ram Mandir movement, and then you see 1992 in Ayodhya, the goons of BJP and RSS. RSS and BJP are otherwise linked. So they stormed the mosque, they bulldozed it, or they demolished it. That is how BJP is now getting its vote and has been getting its vote. It has only been talking about Hindutva, and that's the only way it can get the votes. Because Indian National Congress was so-called leaning towards Muslims. And you see, I mean, there is not one person, if I cannot remember one person right now in the parliament in BJP who's a Muslim. Whereas although I'm not here to say that Indian National Congress is pro-Pakistan, they still are enemies and they have done no good things towards Pakistan, but still they are the lesser evil than them. They still have some democratic values. This BJP is completely run by goons right now who are only there getting the Hindu votes and trying to galvanize the Hindus in the name of Hindutva or Akhand Bharat.
Yasir, we have limited time. Tell me, how difficult is the job of Indian diplomats who have to defend all of this in the international theater of politics and diplomacy?
See, when you live your life with lies, you only hear lies, and that becomes the truth for you. So the Indian diplomats, you see them going into the United Nations, they so miserably sit there and defend India when they know they are lying. What they're doing in Kashmir right now is an open secret. Why don't they let international journalists go into Kashmir and see what is happening? The kind of atrocities they are.
They just recently allowed a few journalists to some parts of Kashmir, some parts of Srinagar rather.
That was a very controlled operation. They're talking about some diplomats going as well. That's a very controlled operation. You can pick up people who will speak your language and then take them there.
Yeah.
Unlike the Pakistanis, we took everybody there.
We took the ambassadors to the line of control.
We took the ambassadors to the line of control and let them see themselves. So the thing is, what you said, how difficult is their job? The job is difficult. But then if you start living your life with lies, you will not hear anything else but those lies, and then you live it. So they unfortunately will continue to defend. They will continue to defend India or what they are doing. However, now even the United Nations is saying that Indian hate crimes or the situation for minorities in India is becoming worse and worse. And when they talk about minorities, we predominantly talk about the Muslims and the Christians. But I'm surprised. Okay, if they talk about Hindutva, they have a right to have a Hindu culture because they are a predominantly Hindu society, right? Like we are Muslims and we say, oh, Islam is the binding factor for our country. Agreed. Hinduism is the binding factor because they are about 86% of the population. Then what about the Dalits? Those are also Hindus. Why are they being marginalized? If you are so happy about the Hindu ideology, then why don't you care about the Dalits?
Thank you very much, Yasir.
Thank you
very much. Such a pleasure to have you on my show. Ladies and gentlemen, the polity of India is now in fragmentations. The 20% minorities that we have been discussing about are on the roads, they are on the protest, they are crying for their rights, and if nothing is done, it will only aggravate the Indian crisis further, for which India has a habit of pointing fingers toward countries like Pakistan. This is what Prime Minister Imran Khan has also mentioned in his famous speech at UNGA. We will come to you with another topic next week. Until then, Allah Hafiz.